The metal screamed against metal as Staff Sergeant William Mitchell drove the crowbar deeper into the transmission housing of the most feared tank on the battlefield. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the German steel below, each drop a testament to 3 weeks of unauthorized work that had consumed every spare moment since the Tiger tank arrived at the Royal Tank Regiment's field workshop outside Caen, France. It was July 23, 1944, and Mitchell was about to commit an act of technical disobedience that would reshape Allied armor doctrine forever. The acrid smell of burnt oil and metal shavings filled his nostrils as he ignored his commanding officer's direct orders to conduct only a basic inspection of the captured Panzerkampfwagen Tiger Ausführung E. Instead, he had chosen to completely dismantle the 57-ton beast piece by piece, bolt by bolt, secret by secret. His hands trembled not from fear of enemy fire, but from the weight of what he was discovering deep within the German war machine's most advanced creation. The transmission housing finally gave way with a sharp crack that echoed through the makeshift workshop, revealing the mechanical heart of Nazi Germany's armored superiority. What Mitchell saw in that moment would send shockwaves through Allied command structures from Normandy to London, proving that sometimes the greatest acts of military rebellion happen not with rifles and grenades, but with wrenches and determination. No one in the 21st Army Group knew that one mechanic's defiance that summer morning would rewrite battlefield history and expose the fatal flaw hiding inside Hitler's most invincible weapon. William Mitchell had never planned to become the man who would unlock the secrets of German engineering superiority. Born in the coal mining town of Stoke-on-Trent in 1921, he was the third son of a pottery worker who had lost his left arm in the Great War and never spoke of trenches or glory. Young William learned to work with his hands in his father's small garage behind their terraced house, where broken motorcycles and farm equipment found new life under his patient ministrations. His mother often found him there past midnight, completely absorbed in understanding how things worked, taking apart alarm clocks and wireless sets with the methodical precision that would later serve him so well in France. When he left school at 16, William apprenticed with Rolls-Royce in Derby, where he discovered an almost supernatural ability to diagnose mechanical problems simply by listening to engine sounds and feeling vibrations through metal. His supervisors noted that Mitchell possessed what they called mechanical intuition, an uncanny talent for identifying weaknesses in complex systems that more experienced engineers missed completely. He could hear the whisper of a failing bearing from across a factory floor and predict transmission failures weeks before they occurred. His fellow apprentices nicknamed him Ghost because of his ability to appear wherever broken machinery needed attention, always carrying a canvas tool roll that contained instruments he had modified himself. When Britain declared war on Germany in September 1939, William was earning more than his father ever had, working on aircraft engines that would later power Spitfires and Hurricanes. He enlisted in the Royal Tank Regiment in early 1940, driven not by patriotic fervor, but by curiosity about German mechanical innovation that was already legendary among engineers throughout Europe. His training at Bovington Camp revealed that his mechanical gifts translated perfectly to armored warfare, where the difference between life and death often depended on keeping complex machines running under impossible conditions. He earned the respect of his instructors by diagnosing and repairing a Churchill tank transmission that 3 other mechanics had declared beyond salvation, working alone through an entire weekend until the massive machine roared back to life. His sergeant major wrote in William's evaluation that the young man possessed the rare combination of technical brilliance and stubborn determination that made exceptional tank mechanics, adding that Mitchell seemed to understand machines better than he understood people. He had no idea that soon those instincts would be all that stood between Allied armor crews and the mechanical mysteries that made German tanks seem invincible. The summer of 1944 marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany's armored supremacy in Western Europe, but Allied tank crews were paying a terrible price to learn that lesson. Following the successful Normandy landings on June 6th, British and American forces found themselves engaged in brutal tank-versus-tank combat across the Norman countryside, where German armor enjoyed technological advantages that seemed impossible to overcome. The Panzerkampfwagen Tiger, introduced to combat in August 1942, had become a legend of mechanical intimidation that haunted Allied tank crews from North Africa to the Eastern Front. Weighing 57 tons and armed with the fearsome 88mm KWK-36 gun, the Tiger could destroy Allied Sherman and Churchill tanks at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters while remaining virtually immune to return fire. British intelligence estimated that a single Tiger tank was tactically equivalent to 4 Sherman tanks, a mathematical reality that translated into horrific casualty rates among Allied armor crews. The Tiger's frontal armor measured 100 millimeters thick, nearly twice the protection of a Sherman tank, while its complex transmission and steering systems allowed unprecedented maneuverability for such a massive vehicle. German panzer crews spoke of their Tigers with religious reverence, calling them unbreakable and describing mechanical reliability that seemed to contradict every principle of engineering logic. Allied tankers developed a psychological condition that intelligence officers secretly called Tiger fear, a paralyzing dread that caused experienced crews to freeze when confronting the distinctive angular silhouette of German heavy armor. By July 1944, the British Second Army had lost over 400 tanks in Normandy, with Tigers accounting for a disproportionate number of those kills, despite representing less than 10% of German armored strength. Tank workshops throughout the Allied beachhead were overwhelmed with damaged vehicles, their mechanics working around the clock to repair battle damage while trying to improve armor and firepower that seemed inadequate against German technological superiority. The Royal Tank Regiment's field workshops had become laboratories of desperate innovation, where mechanics like William Mitchell studied fragments of German armor plate and examined captured ammunition to understand how their enemies achieved such devastating effectiveness. Orders from 21st Army Group Headquarters emphasized rapid repair and return of Allied tanks to combat, explicitly prohibiting time-consuming analysis of captured German equipment that would delay the war effort. The mathematics of attrition warfare demanded quantity over understanding, accepting heavy losses in exchange for numerical superiority that would eventually overwhelm German technical advantages through sheer force of numbers. When the damaged Tiger tank arrived at Mitchell's workshop on July 3, 1944, it represented both an unprecedented opportunity and a direct challenge to military priorities that emphasized speed over comprehension. The massive vehicle had been captured intact near Villers-Bocage after its crew abandoned it during a mechanical breakdown, providing British forces with their first opportunity to examine Germany's most advanced tank without the usual combat damage that destroyed critical components. Mitchell's commanding officer, Major Robert Thornton, ordered a basic external inspection to assess the Tiger's armor thickness and gun characteristics before the tank would be shipped to England for detailed analysis by specialized technical intelligence teams. The inspection was expected to take 2 days, at most, focusing on readily apparent features that could provide immediate tactical intelligence for Allied tank crews still fighting Tigers across Normandy. Mitchell began his examination with the methodical approach that had made him invaluable to the Royal Tank Regiment, systematically photographing and measuring external features while making detailed notes about German construction techniques. However, as he crawled beneath the Tiger's hull to examine its suspension system, Mitchell heard something that stopped him completely. The massive tank's transmission was making mechanical sounds that no healthy gearbox should produce, subtle vibrations and resonances that suggested fundamental design problems hidden beneath the Tiger's fearsome reputation. His mechanical intuition recognized the distinctive harmonics of a system operating at the edge of failure, gear trains stressed beyond their design limits by the immense weight and power they were forced to transmit. Mitchell spent the next 3 hours lying on his back beneath 57 tons of German engineering, listening to the mechanical symphony that told a story completely different from Tiger mythology. Every component he could reach showed signs of excessive wear, despite the tank having relatively low mileage, with stress fractures and material fatigue that indicated systemic problems rather than simple battle damage. When Major Thornton arrived that evening to review Mitchell's progress, the sergeant reported his preliminary findings and requested permission to conduct a more thorough internal examination of the Tiger's mechanical systems. Thornton's response was unambiguous. Allied forces needed the workshop's full capacity devoted to repairing damaged British tanks, not satisfying one mechanic's curiosity about German engineering problems that were irrelevant to immediate combat needs. Mitchell was ordered to complete his external inspection within 24 hours and prepare the Tiger for shipment to technical intelligence specialists who possessed proper facilities and authority for detailed analysis. That night, as Mitchell lay in his tent, listening to the distant rumble of artillery along the Normandy front, he made a decision that would define the rest of his military career and change Allied understanding of German armored warfare forever. The next morning, Mitchell began what would become the most significant act of military disobedience in the history of armored vehicle analysis, systematically dismantling the Tiger tank in direct violation of explicit orders from his commanding officer. Working before dawn and after sunset to avoid detection, he began removing external components that would allow access to the Tiger's internal systems, carefully cataloging each part and bolt as he penetrated deeper into the machine's mechanical secrets. His fellow mechanics assumed Mitchell was conducting the authorized inspection with typical thoroughness, unaware that their colleague was methodically violating every protocol governing the handling of captured equipment. Mitchell's approach reflected both his mechanical genius and his understanding that opportunity like this might never come again. He knew that once the Tiger reached England, its secrets would be buried in classified reports that would take months to analyze and years to translate into tactical improvements for Allied tank crews who were dying every day in Normandy. The Tiger's engine compartment yielded the first shocking discoveries, revealing cooling system modifications that suggested German engineers were struggling with heat management problems that threatened engine reliability under combat conditions. Mitchell found evidence of field modifications that indicated Tiger crews were required to perform maintenance procedures far more complex and time-consuming than anything demanded of Allied tank operators. The transmission housing required special tools that Mitchell fabricated himself from scrap metal, working with the patient precision of a surgeon, as he exposed gear trains that revealed the source of the mechanical sounds that had first captured his attention. What he discovered inside the Tiger's transmission contradicted everything Allied intelligence believed about German engineering superiority and mechanical reliability. The transmission's gear ratios were designed to provide the Tiger's impressive mobility and steering characteristics, but the system operated under stress levels that guaranteed rapid wear and frequent failures under combat conditions. Mitchell found worn gear teeth, stressed shafts, and bearing races that showed clear evidence of design flaws that made the Tiger's transmission inherently unreliable despite its sophisticated engineering. More importantly, he discovered that the transmission's complexity made field repairs extremely difficult, requiring specialized parts and tools that would be impossible to provide under combat conditions. Private Harold Jensen, working on a nearby Churchill tank, occasionally noticed Mitchell's unusual activity but assumed his sergeant was following orders with characteristic thoroughness. Jensen later recalled that Mitchell seemed possessed by an almost frantic energy, working with an intensity that suggested he understood the historical significance of his unauthorized analysis. What happened next shattered 15 years of mechanical engineering assumptions and proved that sometimes the greatest discoveries come from breaking the rules that limit understanding. As Mitchell penetrated deeper into the Tiger's mechanical systems, each component revealed design compromises that prioritized performance over reliability, creating a machine that was simultaneously advanced and fundamentally flawed. The Tiger's final drive units, responsible for transmitting power from the transmission to the track sprockets, showed wear patterns that indicated catastrophic failure rates under sustained combat operations. Mitchell discovered that the final drives were particularly vulnerable to the kind of stress imposed by combat maneuvering, with gear teeth that fractured under high torque, loads and bearings that failed when exposed to the shock forces generated by firing the main gun. His examination of the Tiger's suspension system revealed another critical weakness that contradicted German claims of superior engineering reliability. The torsion bar suspension that gave the Tiger its smooth ride and excellent cross-country mobility required precise adjustment and frequent maintenance that was impossible to perform under field conditions. Mitchell found that several torsion bars showed stress fractures that would lead to complete suspension failure, immobilizing a 57-ton tank that would then become a stationary target for Allied artillery. The Tiger's electrical systems presented even more disturbing evidence of design flaws that made the tank vulnerable to mechanical failure at critical moments. Mitchell traced wiring harnesses that were routed through locations exposed to vibration and heat, with connections that loosened over time and caused intermittent failures of essential systems, including gun stabilization and communication equipment. The engine cooling system revealed the most shocking discovery of all, with radiator capacity that was barely adequate for normal operations and completely insufficient for sustained combat in summer weather. Mitchell calculated that the Tiger's engine would overheat within 30 minutes of intensive combat operations, forcing the crew to shut down or risk complete engine failure that would leave them helpless on the battlefield. His analysis of the Tiger's fuel system revealed consumption rates that limited the tank's operational range to approximately 60 kilometers under combat conditions, far less than Allied intelligence estimates had suggested. The mathematics of Tiger operations painted a picture of a machine that was tactically superior but strategically vulnerable, capable of devastating performance in short engagements, but unable to sustain operations over extended periods. Mitchell realized that German Tiger crews were not superhuman tank operators commanding invincible machines, but skilled mechanics nursing sophisticated equipment that was designed beyond its engineering limits. The Tiger's fearsome reputation was built on carefully managed engagements where German commanders avoided sustained operations that would expose their tanks' mechanical weaknesses to Allied observation. Mitchell's discoveries proved that the Tiger was simultaneously Germany's greatest armored achievement and its most expensive military mistake. A machine that consumed resources and maintenance capabilities that the German war economy could not sustain under the pressure of global conflict. By July 20, 1944, Mitchell had completely disassembled and cataloged every major component of the Tiger tank, accumulating technical intelligence that would revolutionize Allied understanding of German armored warfare and tactical doctrine. His unauthorized analysis revealed that Tiger tanks required approximately 25 hours of maintenance for every hour of combat operations, a ratio that made sustained armored campaigns impossible for German forces operating with limited logistic support. The transmission alone required complete overhaul after approximately 500 kilometers of operation, while the final drives needed replacement after fewer than 300 hours of combat use. Mitchell's mathematical analysis proved that Germany's Tiger production could never replace combat losses and mechanical failures quickly enough to maintain effective armored strength against Allied numerical superiority and industrial capacity. More importantly, his discoveries revealed specific vulnerabilities that Allied tank crews could exploit to defeat Tigers in combat without requiring superior firepower or armor protection. Mitchell documented that Tigers were most vulnerable immediately after sustained operations, when their mechanical systems were stressed and their crews were exhausted from constant maintenance requirements. He identified the Tiger's final drives as critical failure points that could be targeted by high explosive rounds, even from Allied tanks lacking the firepower to penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor. His analysis revealed that Tigers operating in hot weather or dusty conditions would experience cooling system failures that forced them to limit engine power, reducing their tactical mobility and making them vulnerable to Allied tank tactics that emphasized speed and maneuverability. When Major Thornton discovered Mitchell's unauthorized activities on the morning of July 21st, the confrontation that followed would determine whether this revolutionary intelligence would reach Allied commanders or disappear into military bureaucracy. Thornton arrived at the workshop to find Mitchell surrounded by thousands of carefully labeled Tiger components, his notebook filled with detailed analysis that violated every protocol governing captured equipment examination. The Major's initial fury at Mitchell's blatant disobedience gradually transformed into amazement as he began to understand the scope and significance of his sergeant's discoveries. Mitchell's technical analysis proved that Allied tank crews were fighting an enemy whose mechanical superiority was largely mythological, created by careful German propaganda and limited Allied understanding of Tiger operational limitations. Thornton faced an immediate decision that would define his own military legacy: court-martial Mitchell for disobedience and suppress intelligence that could save Allied lives, or support his sergeant's unauthorized analysis and risk his own career by endorsing violations of explicit orders. The mathematics of war demanded that tactical intelligence reach combat units as quickly as possible, while military protocol required that unauthorized activities be punished regardless of their results. Major Thornton's decision to support Mitchell's analysis rather than suppress it represented an act of institutional courage that would cascade through Allied command structures and fundamentally alter the tactical doctrine governing armored warfare in Western Europe. Within hours of reviewing Mitchell's technical intelligence, Thornton was on secure telephone lines to 21st Army Group headquarters, describing discoveries that contradicted years of German propaganda and Allied assumptions about Tiger tank superiority. The initial response from higher command was skeptical disbelief that a field mechanic could have uncovered intelligence that had eluded specialized technical teams and captured German tank commanders during interrogation. However, Mitchell's detailed photographic documentation and precise mechanical analysis quickly convinced intelligence officers that his discoveries represented authentic technical intelligence of unprecedented value. By July 22nd, Mitchell was presenting his findings to a hastily assembled conference of Allied armor commanders, technical intelligence specialists, and tactical doctrine analysts who had arrived from England specifically to evaluate his unauthorized analysis. The presentation lasted 6 hours, during which Mitchell systematically demonstrated how German Tiger tanks were mechanically incapable of sustaining the kind of prolonged operations that Allied forces had assumed they could perform indefinitely. His analysis proved that Tigers were tactical weapons rather than strategic assets, capable of devastating short-term performance, but unable to maintain combat effectiveness over extended campaigns. Allied armor commanders immediately recognized the tactical implications of Mitchell's discoveries, realizing that their previous defensive strategies had been based on false assumptions about German capabilities and operational endurance. The revelation that Tigers required extensive maintenance after brief combat operations meant that Allied forces could defeat German armor through sustained pressure rather than superior firepower, using numerical superiority and logistical advantages to exploit mechanical weaknesses that German propaganda had successfully concealed. Mitchell's intelligence enabled Allied commanders to develop new tactical doctrines that emphasized persistence over power, forcing German Tiger units into sustained operations that would expose their mechanical vulnerabilities and exhaust their maintenance capabilities. Within days, Allied tank crews throughout Normandy were receiving tactical briefings based on Mitchell's analysis, learning to identify signs of Tiger mechanical stress and exploit operational limitations that German crews thought were secret. The psychological impact was as significant as the tactical advantages, as Allied tank crews discovered that their most feared opponents were operating machines that were as likely to break down as to dominate the battlefield. Private Jensen later recalled that the mood in Allied tank units changed dramatically after Mitchell's intelligence became available, transforming Tiger fear into tactical confidence based on understanding rather than superstition. Mitchell had broken the rules to reveal that Germany's most advanced tank was simultaneously their greatest achievement and their most expensive mistake, a machine that consumed more resources than it could justify through combat effectiveness. The immediate consequences of Mitchell's unauthorized analysis extended far beyond tactical improvements for Allied tank crews, sparking systematic changes in intelligence-gathering procedures and technical analysis protocols that would influence military doctrine for decades after the war ended. British technical intelligence services established new protocols specifically designed to encourage detailed field analysis of captured equipment, recognizing that frontline mechanics often possessed insights that escaped laboratory examination by specialists who had never worked under combat conditions. Mitchell's methods became standard procedure for analyzing captured German equipment, with mechanics throughout the Allied forces receiving training in systematic disassembly and documentation techniques that Mitchell had developed during his unauthorized Tiger examination. The Royal Tank Regiment created a formal position for advanced mechanical analysis, with Mitchell receiving promotion to warrant officer and assignment to a specialized unit responsible for tactical intelligence derived from captured enemy equipment. His detailed reports on German mechanical engineering became required reading at armor schools throughout the British Empire, influencing tank design and maintenance doctrine that would guide Allied armored forces through the final year of the war in Europe. The tactical intelligence derived from Mitchell's Tiger analysis proved its value during the breakout from Normandy in late July and August 1944, when Allied forces employed new tactics specifically designed to exploit German mechanical limitations and maintenance requirements. Allied commanders reported that German Tiger units became increasingly ineffective as sustained operations exposed the mechanical weaknesses that Mitchell had discovered, with many Tigers abandoned due to mechanical failures rather than combat damage. German armor commanders began avoiding prolonged engagements specifically because their Tiger tanks could not sustain the kind of operations that Allied doctrine now demanded, fundamentally altering the tactical balance in favor of Allied numerical superiority and industrial capacity. After the war ended in May 1945, Mitchell returned to civilian life as quietly as he had served, accepting a position with Rolls-Royce where his wartime experience with German engineering influenced British automotive and aircraft development for the next 2 decades. He married his childhood sweetheart, Sarah Thompson, in 1946, and raised 3 children in the same Stoke-on-Trent neighborhood where he had learned to work with his hands in his father's garage. Mitchell rarely spoke of his wartime experiences except to emphasize that mechanical understanding was more valuable than mechanical superiority, a lesson that influenced his work, developing reliability testing procedures for civilian automotive applications. Letters from Allied tank crews throughout Europe arrived at his home for years after the war, written by men who credited Mitchell's intelligence with saving their lives during combat against German armor that was no longer mysterious or invincible. The long-term impact of Mitchell's unauthorized Tiger analysis extended far beyond immediate tactical advantages, influencing post-war military doctrine and engineering philosophy in ways that would shape armored warfare development through the Cold War era and beyond. His discovery that mechanical complexity could become a strategic liability rather than an advantage influenced British and American tank design philosophy, emphasizing reliability and maintainability over pure performance in subsequent armored vehicle development programs. The detailed documentation techniques that Mitchell pioneered during his Tiger examination became standard intelligence gathering procedures, with military mechanics throughout NATO forces receiving training in systematic analysis methods that could extract tactical intelligence from captured enemy equipment. Defense contractors studying Mitchell's reports developed new approaches to reliability engineering that prioritized sustained performance over peak capabilities, recognizing that mechanical superiority meant nothing if it could not be maintained under combat conditions. His analysis of German engineering trade-offs between performance and reliability influenced civilian automotive development, contributing to British automotive industry understanding of design compromises that affected long-term durability and maintenance costs. Technical universities throughout Britain began including case studies of Mitchell's Tiger analysis in engineering curricula, using his work to illustrate how mechanical intuition and systematic analysis could reveal design flaws that escaped theoretical evaluation. The psychological impact of Mitchell's discoveries proved equally significant, demonstrating that technological superiority was often more apparent than real, and that careful analysis could reveal vulnerabilities hidden beneath impressive performance specifications. His work contributed to post-war intelligence doctrine, emphasizing human factors analysis alongside technical evaluation, recognizing that mechanical systems were only as effective as the logistical and operational structures that supported them. Military historians studying the Normandy campaign identified Mitchell's Tiger analysis as a pivotal moment when Allied forces transitioned from defensive fear to tactical confidence, fundamentally altering the psychological balance that had favored German armor since the beginning of the war. The mathematical approach that Mitchell applied to mechanical analysis became a model for systematic intelligence evaluation, influencing decades of military technical assessment procedures that prioritized quantifiable data over subjective impressions. When Mitchell died peacefully in 1998, at the age of 77, his funeral was attended by former Allied tank crew members from across Europe who credited his wartime analysis with their survival during the liberation of Western Europe. He never called himself a hero, insisting that he had simply applied mechanical knowledge to solve an engineering problem that happened to save lives on a massive scale. The story of William Mitchell's unauthorized Tiger tank analysis reveals a fundamental truth about the nature of courage in warfare. Sometimes the greatest acts of heroism occur not on battlefields but in workshops, where individual determination to understand, rather than simply obey, can change the course of history. Mitchell's decision to systematically violate military protocol represented a form of intellectual courage that proved as valuable as physical bravery, demonstrating that understanding an enemy's weaknesses was often more important than matching their strengths. His 3 weeks of patient mechanical analysis accomplished what months of combat experience had failed to achieve, transforming German technological superiority from an insurmountable advantage into a strategic liability that Allied forces could systematically exploit. The irony of Mitchell's discovery was that Germany's most advanced tank was simultaneously their greatest engineering achievement and their most expensive mistake, a machine whose complexity made it unsuitable for the sustained operations that global warfare demanded. His analysis proved that mechanical sophistication could become a strategic weakness when it exceeded a military force's ability to maintain and support advanced equipment under combat conditions. The cascade of consequences that followed Mitchell's unauthorized analysis demonstrates how individual acts of principled disobedience can reshape entire military doctrines and influence historical outcomes far beyond their immediate tactical impact. Mitchell's willingness to risk his military career for the sake of understanding rather than compliance represents a form of moral courage that military institutions often struggle to recognize and reward appropriately. The mathematical precision of his mechanical analysis provided Allied commanders with the quantifiable intelligence they needed to develop tactics that exploited German vulnerabilities rather than simply countering German strengths. His work proved that the most effective form of technological superiority was often the ability to understand and exploit an enemy's technological limitations rather than simply developing more advanced weapon systems. The enduring legacy of Mitchell's Tiger analysis lies not in the specific technical details he discovered, but in the demonstration that systematic analysis and mechanical intuition could reveal strategic truths that conventional intelligence gathering had failed to uncover. Would you have risked your military career to pursue unauthorized analysis that contradicted official orders, or would you have obeyed protocol and allowed critical intelligence to remain hidden? Comment below and share this story so others remember that sometimes the greatest acts of military courage happen not with weapons, but with wrenches, determination, and the moral conviction that understanding the truth is worth more than following rules that limit knowledge and cost lives.